Hi, everyone. Welcome to our UK Biobank Imaging Data Symposium. Very pleased to have everyone join us for this exciting session. A very exciting day today for UK Biobank with the version 20 data release that you'll start to be able to explore some of the new data that we have available. And very excited to share today some of the insights into some of the data that we've got specifically focusing on the incredible wealth of imaging data within this current release. So my name is Adam and I'm Deputy Chief Scientist at UK Biobank. We're going to start off with a brief background to UK Biobank, as well as the progress of the imaging study, as well as our repeat imaging study, which not all of you will be aware of. We'll also take a look at some case studies. We've got three experts, incredibly talented and accomplished researchers sharing some of their insights across the different imaging modalities that we'll also have a chance for a panel discussion with to hear some of their opinions about what some of the findings have been to date with the research data and what they're looking forward to for the future. We're also going to have some insights into some of the latest tools and technologies for imaging, as well as a walkthrough of how to use some of the analysis as well on the UKB research analysis platform. We also want to highlight some of the imaging for early career researchers, so some practical guidance for researchers new to imaging, as well as an opportunity for Q&A. So just as a reminder to everyone, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but I want to kind of give it a bit of an overview so that you have an understanding of where the participants are coming from for the imaging study. So as a reminder, back in between 2006 and 2010, we had 500,000 participants that joined UK Biobank for a series of assessments that were done between 22 assessment centres around the UK. With comprehensive baseline data collection, including questions through questionnaires, anthropometric and demographic information, some physiological measures, sample collection, as well as cognitive tests. And importantly, at that time was also the consent for the participants to be able to access all of their medical records, as well as their health-related medical records, and to recontact them for future assessments, whether that be in person or online through questionnaire. So many researchers around the world, we now have over 22,000 active researchers that are using UK Biobank data, and really the scale, depth, and duration, as well as the accessibility of the data for any health-related research on an equal basis across academic, charities, government, and industry partners is why UK Biobank has become such a rich biomedical resource around the world. We now have users in over 60 countries. We're at around 18,000 publications. So we're looking at about 10 to 12 papers today, per day. And we know that the impact is now translating into real clinic situations as well. Now, the imaging study was set out just over 10 years ago, and that was to be able to bring back at least 100,000 participants, which was a really ambitious goal at the time, to be able to repeat some of those baseline assessments. So on the same participants, repeat those baseline assessments, as well as perform multi-organ imaging modalities. This includes brain MRI on a 3 Tesla Siemens scanner, as well as cardiac and body MRI on a 1.5 Tesla Siemens scanner, as well as some cardiac monitoring with data to become made available in the future, as well as DEXA, carotid ultrasound, and 12-lead ECG data. Now, the incredible thing about this was just designing a protocol that was going to be scalable, to be able to be achieved within the timelines, but also at a standardized way across imaging centers. So UK Biobank has 4 imaging centers. We have Newcastle, Reading, Bristol, and Cheadle, which is just outside of Manchester. And what we can see here is the increase in the number of participants that have attended for these different imaging assessments throughout time. On the 8th of July, or I believe maybe the 7th of July, sorry, I can't remember the exact date, we had the goal achieved of reaching 100,000 participants, which is really an exceptional landmark for the organization, but also for the entire research community as well, and something that participants are very proud of, having been able to take part in such an impactful study. We're still going though, and we expect by the end of the year to reach 105,000 participants as part of the imaging assessment. But today we're looking at the first 100,000 datasets becoming available for the datasets for the first 100,000 participants becoming available to all of you. I also want to just flag today, although it's not the main focus, but it is something to be looking forward to in the future, is the fact that we're not stopping there. We recognize that the phenome is dynamic, and it's important to assess changes in time as well with these different imaging parameters. So we're going to be repeating this in around 60,000 participants, and this project started in 2023, and we've now hit nearly 20,000 participants, or we'll get to that mark by early January. So this is really going to take things a step further, that we'll be able to look at assessments of changes over time, over a significant period of time, and be able to look at different determinants of these change and their link and relevance to different health outcomes as well. So taking a look at this, the projections again across the 4 imaging centers, where we have these standardized measures, standardized equipment, as well as the software and protocol across the 4 imaging centers, we can see that the numbers are going to be steadily rising towards the end of 2028. And we anticipate a small overshoot of those participant numbers as well into 2029. So I think at this point, I'd just also like to say thank you to all of the incredible staff that have helped deliver this project as well. You can imagine reaching these kind of numbers across 4 centers means that for the imaging program, we had 18 participants per day, 7 days a week, running around 340 days per year. And we also had an incredible, we're now seeing 15 participants a day for the repeat imaging, as there's also a few additional assessments, including OCT imaging for assessing more of the eye and vision relevant parameters as well. So another thing to look forward to in the future. So coming back to the agenda, I'm going to hand over now to Oliver Gray, who is our product manager at UK Biobank for imaging, and he leads the data quality efforts for the imaging project and manages a lot of the collaborations with both academic and industry partners, thinking really about how do we scale up the different image-derived phenotypes that we have within the resource and making those available to all of you as researchers. He also holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience and expertise in big data, machine learning, and cloud computing. Oliver, I'll hand over to you now, and looking forward to hearing from you about all of the new and exciting data we're making available.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Thank you all very much for listening today and being in attendance. I'm here to talk to you about new data and the new science that's enabling and the brilliant insights that you can make from the data that we have. So a deeply characterized cohort is a pillar of the work at UK Biobank. As Adam mentioned, each day at UK Biobank assessment centres, we acquire data from up to 60 participants across all of the modalities listed here. That's 4 centres collecting 15 participants a day, working really, really hard. 100,000 participants have now passed through those assessment centres as part of the UK Biobank imaging study. We have today announced the release of those data sets from these participants, the research community. So it's something that the organisation is incredibly proud of, and looking forward to seeing what the community does and what they feed back to us throughout this data. So I'm going to start off by talking about the 2 streams of work that imaging data is included into the resource as. First, as I just mentioned, the data is acquired at our assessment centres and provided directly to the community via the UKB-RAP. The second stream provided gets processed includes process data. So the data collected from clinics gets sent to researchers and transformed into imaging-derived phenotypes, numeric summarizations of the structure, function, and any relevant features that are in those images. For example, total grey matter volume of the brain. And then pre-processed images are made ready for further downstream analysis, and we provide those in machine learning ready formats, and we're continually improving and taking feedback on board about that data and how to improve it. So here you can see some of the data that comes directly from the clinics, and you can see examples of brain, liver, some heart, short axis sign images, and kidney images, as well as our whole body DEXA data. Details of the methods of acquisition of these data are available on the UK Biobank Showcase, and we are continually updating these resources to provide all the details that you might need for your analyses. We're also on hand for questions through the Zendesk community about the data and how you might use it. This table presents representative fields and describes the availability of those data fields. These numbers vary largely because some aspects of the study protocol evolved over time, and some participants are unable to complete certain aspects of the study. We do provide virtually all the data that we're able to acquire, and despite the challenges faced by staff at our centres each day, the quality of the vast majority of this UK Biobank data is highly complete and of excellent quality. In the last 6 months, since we last released data, we've added datasets for over 10,000 participants, and across all the imaging data that we're releasing, this has increased the size of the dataset by over 100 terabytes. So I'll now describe the second stream of data that we incorporate into the resource. We facilitate providing this data from the research community for the research community. This work stream is continually expanding, and the data provided are really at the frontier of the imaging research today. Notable publication and sharing and analysis of new data. We're always keen to hear from kind of notable publications, and you can get in contact with us via Zendesk and by contacting me about exciting work that you hear about. One such example of this type of data is the generation of statistics that summarize the structure and function of the heart of our participants. We acquire multiple MRI sequences through time at UK Biobank assessment centres, and the work of researchers like Wenjibai at Imperial builds on segmentations that were drawn on manually drawn on thousands of these images to automatically derive features like ejection fractions, wall thickness, and heart mass across all of our participants that have had data acquired. This release, we're including an additional 40,000 participants worth of data. So the coverage for heart features now is at 81,000. We'll be looking to expand this further in the future, up to the 160,000 data sets that we hope to be available over the next few years. 83 imaging-derived fields provided. So ejection fraction, wall thickness, and heart mass don't cover even 3 of those 83 features. It should be noted that these are independent of those provided in category 162, which are provided from a different source and should be used separately, and that's very carefully validated. We're including cardiac mesh models in the UK Biobank resource for the first time in this release. Alistair Young, who's speaking today, is at the forefront of work enabling 3-dimensional spatial biology from the heart MRI images. And we're really grateful to him for providing this data, and his group for providing the 55,000 data sets that we've included in this release. I'll let Alistair tell you all about the dataset and its features and its exciting science that it's enabling. But one fantastic feature of the dataset and something that we're looking to expand is the provision of the code that used to derive all of these meshes, along with a script to facilitate visualization and downstream analysis of the data on GitHub. And we'll be providing a link to that in our GitHub, our UK Biobank GitHub that we'll be describing throughout the talks here. We also have a plethora of brain imaging data available in the UK Biobank imaging resource. Steve Smith, who's talking shortly, has supported throughout the UK Biobank imaging study in providing these data. And with this release, data is available for over 90,000 participants across brain imaging modalities that we acquire at the clinics. This includes imaging-derived phenotypes and pre-processed data that are ready for further analysis, and intermediary data files as well that can be great starting points and lift-off platforms for alternative processing of the large-scale imaging data. In addition, for the first time, we're releasing the Pandora dataset. This dataset is available for 82,000 participants and provides pre-processed brain imaging data at the voxel and supervoxel levels. Again, I'll allow Steve the pleasure of describing this data for the first time and the wonderful new science that Pandora is enabling as well. This release also sees the inclusion of IDPs derived from the UK Biobank Dementia Platform UK and COVID repeat imaging study. This data is available for 4,500 participants. The longitudinal data are derived using simultaneous assessment of the initial imaging visit and the paired repeat imaging visit images to reduce the within subjects variance of the registration and the normalization steps of the image processing pipeline. This data comes and was derived by the work of Cheryl C. and Matthew Kempson at KCL, and we're grateful for their contribution. The coverage of this data is for the T1 weighted scans, and again, this data differ from that in category 110, which includes single time point cross-sectional measures. I just want to give an illustration of some of the differences that between the longitudinal and the cross-sectional data. And here you can see the correlation between the repeat, the volume of white matter hyperintensities derived from the repeat visit scan and those derived from the initial visit scan. And additionally, here I'm showing the standard deviation difference in the whole category of IDP variables according to the method that they've been derived on. So here you can see kind of 2/3 of a standard deviation difference between the values that you might get out of longitudinal free surface metrics and those derived from the cross-sectional metrics. All of this is essentially to illustrate and encourage users of the data to avoid mixing the data between the cross-sectional and the longitudinal data categories. We look forward again to seeing what extra work and additional insights can be provided from this new free surface data. We're providing in this release data from the derived from the UK Biobank DEXA scans collected at the assessment centres to increase the total up to 70,000 full coverage from each of the different types of DEXA scans that we have. We obviously cover spine, 2 images of the spine, knees, hips. So there's a real kind of variability in terms of what IDPs are available in terms of bone mineral density and ossification of those joints and bones. Additionally, for the first time, we're providing derived data from the DEXA images describing the skeletal features of 38,000 participants. This includes data describing the skeletal proportions of these participants, as well as in the paper, one can see the comparison and correlation of these data with the phenotypic, the rest of the phenotype and genetics that are available within UK Biobank. And the group did some really interesting work in looking at the genetic evolutionarily relevant features and correlating pain in the different joints that we image with those genetic features and evolutionarily features. Whilst I've talked thus far about data coming from the UK Biobank imaging study, we're also releasing in this showcase refresh more data describing the baseline OCT acquisitions. So this includes retinal clinical gradings of the retinal images, the OCT images, and the fundus images that we make, as well as automatically derived color fundus derived eye measures. So the work of Warwick et al. In 2023 described features like age-related macular degeneration and glaucoma, and identified 15,000 participants with signs of age-related macular degeneration. And interestingly, fewer than 1% of these participants had a recorded diagnosis. In addition, features suggesting glaucoma were identified in 2,100 participants, with again fewer than 10% having a recorded diagnosis in health records. The study also assessed microaneurysms and compared baseline measures like BMI between diagnosis groups. These gradings were done by the Central Administrative Research Facility of certified graders, and quality was assured by clinicians of the network of ophthalmic reading centres in the UK. Whilst derived from images from the UK Biobank baseline assessments, these data clearly provide a significant improvement in the phenotypic characterization of our participants, and we hope that further characterizations can be provided based on the data that we are now acquiring from the UK Biobank repeat imaging study. In addition to those clinical gradings, we're also including optic disc, foveal and vascular parameters that were derived from the color fundus photographs by Yi and colleagues. These parameters are derived from segmentation of the arterial and venous vasculature of the eye, as displayed here on the right. As well as those vascular segmentations, these have then been measured for the concave shape of each arcade, along with the location of the optic disc and the fovea, and the distance and angle between these structures. The authors then looked at the refractive indices of individual participants' eyes and associated the structures of the eyes with measured from these automatic derivations with participant refractive errors. Again, these are both of these data sets provided for many thousands, tens of thousands of participants, and we're really looking forward to seeing expansions of these data in the future. So to summarize, this is the first imaging dataset release since reaching 100,000 participants. We've included imaging data from all 100,000 of those participants across cardiac IDPs and mesh models, as well as skeletal measures derived from the DEXA images, a major update to the brain imaging pipeline data, additional free surfer longitudinal metrics, as well as clinical gradings of eye health and color fundus derived eye measures. In terms of reading more about these, you can read guides on tools, visualizations, and brain imaging analysis, and more on this QR code. And if you're wondering about where you can get a list of these, that we have articles on the Zendesk community describing the upcoming data release, and we do this for each and every release that we create. So we have one describing what we released in the version 19 release about 6 months ago, as well as past data releases prior to that. So I hope that you found that interesting, and I'm really looking forward to, I hope you are, to the rest of the speakers that are coming up today. So I'll hand back to Adam now, and thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Ollie. A lot of information there, of course. So there is further information available on the website about the data release, and the recordings will be made available for this session afterwards as well to all of you. So you can always revisit and kind of digest a little bit more with the new content that's coming through. The next section is very exciting. We're going to hear from 3 researchers, as mentioned, about different case studies, looking at different areas of research that they've been leading on and really carrying forward, and also supporting us with these different image-derived phenotypes to be able to make available to the community. So we're going to start off with Professor Louise Thomas, and we're very honored to be joined by Professor Thomas, a trailblazer in metabolic imaging and precision health. She has over 30 years of experience now and has really revolutionized how we assess metabolic disease risk using advanced MRI techniques. So her work with UK Biobank and industry partners has also enabled large-scale non-invasive health assessments that are shaping a lot of future diagnostics. And today she'll be exploring how imaging and data science are unlocking new pathways to optimal health. We're then going to hear from Professor Stephen Smith. So it's a pleasure to have Steve here with us. He's a key member of our expert imaging working group as well, advising us and supporting us for designing the entire imaging program, but also how to maintain the high standards of quality over time as well. And he's a leading figure in biomedical engineering and neuroimaging with decades of experience at the University of Oxford. What he'll be talking about today is very quite exciting, sharing insights into the future of brain imaging, but also its role in understanding individual and population level health, and kind of what he's been working on to make this a little bit easier for different researchers to be able to work with the data within the UK Biobank research analysis platform as well. And finally, we'll hear from Professor Alistair Young, who's a pioneering figure in cardiovascular imaging and data analytics, and also a longtime user of UK Biobank data. So Professor Young leads research at King's College London, where he's helping us understand more about heart function through cutting-edge MRI techniques and artificial intelligence. And his work on the Cardiac Atlas projects and contributions to global imaging standards have advanced both clinical diagnostics and population level health research. So today he's going to be sharing insights into how AI and imaging are reshaping cardiovascular care and enabling earlier, more precise measurements within that context as well, and with a focus on the release of the cardiac mesh data for the first time as well within UK Biobank. So 3 great speakers coming up, and we'll start off, I'll hand over to Professor Louise Thomas. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Adam. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what we're doing with the abdominal MRI images. So that is the neck to knee acquisition and some of the work we've been doing on this at the University of Westminster. Now, lots of people might say, why bother using something as expensive as MRI for looking at body composition? In fact, most big studies, genetic studies still rely on things like body mass index, the BMI, or the waist circumference. But on an individual level, this doesn't really tell you anything useful about body composition. You can see Arnie here in his prime with a BMI of 30, which would have classified him as obese. He's clearly very muscular, whereas later in life, his BMI had reduced, making him overweight. But you can visually see that the BMI is not telling you much about his health. Now, we know people with an identical BMI can have completely different levels of visceral fat. That's the fat in the abdomen. That's bad for you, coloured green here. And the same is true for waist circumference. So neither of these are telling you about the very important fat depot, which is the driver of most metabolic disease. The same is true of muscle. People with an identical BMI can have not just complete different amounts of muscle. It's not just the volume, it's the quality. If you look at the white streaky fat you can see in the image at the bottom here, a bit like the marbling in steak. The amount of that is really important for disease, and you cannot tell this unless you're directly imaging. Now, one of the reasons people didn't really do much body composition by imaging is the expense and the complexity of the analysis. So when we started looking at body composition back in the 90s, a study of about 20 people would be considered quite big. Then the UK Biobank came along with a crazy idea of scanning 100,000 people. And this has changed imaging forever, because we needed to move from manual analysis to a completely automated way just to keep up with the amount of data we have. In the beginning, we had great plans of how we were going to analyze liver and pancreas fat, and also how much adipose tissue people had. But we didn't really have a very clear plan of how we were going to take that further. So what we've done, and this is some brilliant work led by my colleague Brandon Witcher at Westminster in collaboration with Calico. And we found a way where you take the output from the UK Biobank images, you can automatically stitch them together, you correct for errors that are characteristic of Dixon imaging, and then we can train the data. So we might manually annotate, say, 100 data sets. We can train a deep learning model to automatically extract that measurement. And we can do that at scale. And we've expanded our work greatly from just looking at a few major organs to now identify 95% of all the pixels in the body. Now, what you've then got is the power to run your genetics, your PheWAS, all these other measurements on directly measured metrics of body composition. And this has been really important for genetic discovery and potential druggable targets. So to give you the kind of headline idea, we've got sort of many hundreds now of imaging-derived phenotypes. These include all the major organs. We can look up substructures of these. We can look at fat and muscle, the shape of most of the organs, the bones, volumes. We can look at the fat and iron content of most organs. And all of this data is being returned to the UK Biobank, so everybody can benefit from this. My main interest is in fat, which I think underlies most major non-communicable diseases. And we can look at the distribution of fat, we can look at fat at a global level, and we can look at it in particularly relevant places. We can also go beyond that and look at slightly more esoteric measurements. We can look at the shape of our fat, the thickness. This is a project led by my colleague Maria Khoueiry, and she can map the thickness of the fat everywhere and see how that relates to future risk of metabolic disease. We can look at the composition of the adipose tissue. Now, this is a reflection of long-term lifestyle and diet, and is an important marker for disease and aging. We can also look at genetically derived adiposity and see how that relates to disease. And this has been led by our colleague Hanya Yagatu, who's currently at Southampton. So we can get a lot more added value from fat than simple volumetric measurements. The same is true of muscle. Now, muscle was always technically much more complicated to measure. In the early days, people only really used to manually measure fats because the muscle just took too long. But now we can look at that on a global level. We can look at individual muscles, all the individual thigh muscles, and we can look at particular muscles like the gluteus maximus, which is perhaps the most important muscle in your body for health, which we'll come back to later. Now, with this, we can look at global things that we know about, really. We know that sarcopenia is associated with reduced muscle volume, something that happens to us naturally as we age. But we can also look at how our muscle fat increases as we age, and that is very strongly related to frailty. We can look at individuals like the psoas, which is a very important indicator. It can tell how well you're going to do in surgery, how well your cancer treatment might go. But we can look at individual muscles. This is a fantastic project that my colleague Brandon has led with collaborators at Imperial, where we've labelled every individual thigh muscle, so that's 21 muscles in each leg, and we can see how they're differentially associated with disease. And this is proven to be particularly exciting in things like type 2 diabetes. We can look at the liver. Now, this is something we did at the very beginning of the UK Biobank with Perspectum Diagnostics, where we could map the amount of inflammation and excess iron and fat stored within the UK population. And at that time, I think we did about 5,000 people, and about 20% of these had fatty liver. But now we've analysed about 90,000 participants for the liver fat, and almost 30% have fatty liver. But this is what a normal amount of fat in the liver, 5% is the agreed cutoff. But we think for health, we need a much lower level. And if you look at what we think is a healthy level of fat, over 90% have got more fat. Now, if you scale this up into the UK population, we have a ticking bomb of progressive liver disease. And this is a really interesting way of looking at discovery, and we've been able to identify genes associated with this. So hopefully there will be treatments coming online for this. Beyond that, we can look at the shape of the liver, again, led by my colleague Maria, and see how shape is closely related to disease. And we can look at the composition of that fat stored within the liver and see how that changes with liver disease. We can also, instead of looking at fat at a global level, we can subdivide that into the different sections of the liver and map in much more depth than you could from just a global measurement. Now, beyond the liver, we can look at the kidney in depth. We can look at the overall volume of the kidney, or we can subdivide it into its different, the cortex, the medulla. We can see how the genetics of that relates to chronic kidney disease. We can see how kidney shape changes with aging, with disease, and we can also look at how certain fat depots, so we can look at the perithymous fat volumes and see how they're really important for the development of kidney stone diseases. So this is a study we've been doing with a team at Manchester. We could do lots of opportunistic things. We were able to measure spleen iron in the population, something that's not typically measured in the healthy population. And the genetics of that would be able to explain why some people have a severe form of hereditary spherocytosis related to blood cell turnover, and why some people had a very mild form of disease. We could understand why different people were more likely to have a very severe form of COVID, and that related to the amount of visceral fat they had. And then my colleague Nick did a fantastic study where he was automatically be able to detect aortic aneurysms. These aren't from the cardiac scans, these are from the abdominal images. And this is quite exciting because this kind of technology can be very easily translated into clinical use. Another study led by my colleague Brandon, where we took the dementia platform scanning, and we looked at people before and after 2 years of not really doing anything. And we found an increase in visceral fat and muscle fat linked to an increase in blood pressure. And we actually saw a global decrease in muscle, total and regional, coupled with a decrease in grip strength. So this is an adverse phenotype developing over just 2 years. Again, my colleague Micah, what she took all of our imaging measured and combined it with many of the other measurements in the biobank, and she could predict the early onset of disease. And the key measurements in these were the imaging measurements. And then we can see how these biomarkers relate to disease, and we can see how having one disease makes it much more likely for you to develop another disease. So these interesting disease relationships. As I said, we're getting on very well with the analysis. I think at the baseline scans, I think we've finished about 96,000, and we're already making good progress with the follow-up data. I think we're about 14,500 analysed data sets at the moment. And this is a big study we're doing in collaboration with Calico, and this will be returned to the UK Biobank. But huge thanks to the team, particularly Jimmy and Brandon, who are essential for all this work. So I think I'll leave it like that and hand over to Steve, who's going to be telling us much more about the brain.
Hello. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about an update on the brain imaging in UK Biobank. This is recent work that's been led in Oxford by Aslan Abivadi, who's done an amazing job with Pandora. First, a quick slide reminder of what we have in the brain imaging data. So we have, for the 100,000 initial scans, we have the first 6 modalities here: T1, T2, diffusion MRI, susceptibility, and task and resting fMRI. And then we added in for the repeat scanning ASL blood flow imaging. So that is the modalities we have in the brain. So one thing we realized this year was that we could make it much easier for people to work with the data if basically it was reorganized in a much more convenient way, a bit like the genetic data has been forever. So up until now, all of the brain data, whether you're talking about raw or processed data, it's all been stored in many thousands of separate zip files, with one zip file per modality per subject. So if you wanted to do a big analysis across subjects, which is a very common thing to do if you want to work with the image level data, then you would have to unpack all of those zip files and extract the images of interest. Obviously, this is one reason why IDPs, imaging-derived phenotypes, have been very powerful, because those are much more easily available as big matrices of subjects by IDPs. But we wanted to do something as convenient as that for the image level data, the voxel level data. So this is what Pandora has done for the first time for the brain imaging data. So for each of 98 submodalities, I'll give a list of those in a minute, we have pre-processed, de-outliered all of the data in common standard space, and then collated those into big matrix files. So for each modality, we have a massive matrix of subjects by voxels, saved in a single file for all 82,000 subjects that we've processed so far. And you get one of those files for each modality. Those files are not too painful to work with, but they are big. But there are also reduced versions using very high dimensional independent component analysis with what we're calling supervoxels. So it's a reduction of the full voxel data into subjects by supervoxels, which retain most of the detail of the images, but in a way more convenient compact form. And I'll talk about that in some detail. With Pandora, we also provide a pre-estimated set of about 200 imaging confounds that very easily allow you to include those confounds in your cross-subject regressions or correlations. So when you want to correlate one of these big matrices against, say, genetics or blood pressure, you can put in these imaging confounds too into your regression design matrix. To make it really easy to work with these massive matrices of the full imaging data, there's a new software tool, FSL-GLM, which works really well with these HDF5 files, and, for example, only takes about a minute to do an analysis across all 82,000 subjects data for the 1K supervoxel version for one modality. So this is all very easy to run in RAP, including visualization, and I've got a few slides on that too. So Pandora is available on RAP as of yesterday. You just need to copy the Pandora files out of the central store into a running workspace to do these analysis with them. So these are the submodalities. I won't go through it in detail, but for each of the 6 main imaging modalities, you can derive a whole series of different image outputs, which you might want to compare across subjects. For example, you might want to compare the raw T1 intensities, or more likely, you might want to compare the voxel-based morphometry pre-processed outputs from the T1, which is basically a gray matter segmentation. So you can compare that at the voxel level across subjects very easily. So lots of these different submodalities available in Pandora now. This is just another way to visualize what's in Pandora. So this is showing what you get for a single modality. So you have a massive matrix of 82,000 subjects by typically between 0.5 and 2 million voxels, depending on the modality. So you have a vast number of data points in that matrix. You can do, with the FSL-GLM tool, you can do a simple regression of that against any other variables in Biobank, like a given gene. It's slow, but it can be done. It only takes an hour or two to run a single modality. But these supervoxel versions are way more efficient, and there's very little downside to using them. So with ICA, we've decomposed that into an A matrix of the supervoxel weights, and then an S matrix of maps of voxels, which you can use post hoc to visualize your results. The internals of that actually are not particularly important to follow, because the FSL-GLM tool just handles all of that for you, and you'll choose a representation like ICA 1K, and it will give you images out at the end. This is just a quick view of the regression maths, and the bottom line equation there is that you can actually do a full regression on just the ICA reduction, but then in effect include the voxel maps for the supervoxels inside that regression very efficiently. So it really is giving you the equivalent of voxel level analysis, but way more efficiently. So to try and give a much clearer idea of the distinction between these different representations in Pandora, at the bottom you can see for QSM modality on the left and the T1 VBM on the right, you can see really simple analysis across 80,000 subjects of correlating these imaging data, the two modalities, with smoking history. So seeing the long-term deleterious effects of smoking. Two very different imaging modalities. They show different biology, different biophysics. And so that what you see as a result of smoking is different in those two modalities. But unlike working with IDPs, you're actually getting a full voxel level map of that association, which is really cool. And you can see that if you use the 10,000 supervoxels version, it's almost identical, but way more compact and convenient to actually run. And then at the top, the 1K supervoxels, again, very similar representation, but even faster to work with. I'll give a summary of these differences at the end and our recommendations. So because of the denoising effect of the ICA reduction to supervoxels, for cases like this is the smoking association, you actually get a lot more statistical power with the ICA reductions as well. So that's another reason why it's nice to work with the supervoxels. But if you only work with the really compact 1K, you will, in some cases, see a slight reduction of the spatial accuracy. And you can see here that there's more exact fine detail of the localization in the hippocampus. This is correlating with neuroticism, another example that Aslan has run. And you can see that the spatial detail in the 10K supervoxels is qualitatively indistinguishable from the full voxels. Here's another example. So this is 10K supervoxels correlating against PTSD, another really cool result from Aslan. So we're getting strong, statistically significant localization in a subpart of the amygdala, whereas by comparison, if you use the IDPs, you get a statistically much weaker result because the IDP is a much cruder measure of that entire structure rather than a subpart of the amygdala. For the fMRI, the processing that we do in our core processing pipeline that Fidel Almagro runs on behalf of Biobank, all of the fMRI is run on the cortical surface, so a representation called SIFTI, unlike the other 3D modalities that I had been talking about so far. So in the resting state, this is one of the resting state maps. You can see on the right the representation of the population average. This is just for visualization, but those averages are included in Pandora. On the left, you can see the particular Pandora result, which is correlating that resting state network with alcohol. So finally, a couple of slides on an easy Docker that Paul McCarthy has heroically put together for use on RAP. So this makes it, for the first time, really, really easy to run analyses in a graphical desktop and get visualization interactively of the brain imaging analysis. And this only takes 10 minutes to install on just a modest RAP compute instance once you've started up that compute instance. So you get an X11 style graphical desktop. You can run analyses in there in the terminal or in GUIs. You get the fossilized visualization, the HCP visualization of cortical surfaces, RStudio, MATLAB, All of this is just a click away from you once you've installed this Docker. So that's it from me. There's documentation on all these things. More documentation is coming on how we'd recommend you threshold across these multiple regressions across the modalities. And so the bottom line recommendation for if you want really fast, very low RAM analysis that you can literally do analysis of all 98 modalities in half an hour, the ICA 1K, the 1K supervoxels is really powerful and often gives you the highest statistical sensitivity. If you want full great spatial detail, which is as good as the full voxels, then the 10K supervoxels is great. Thank you. I will stop there and hand over to Alistair Young from King's. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So I want to talk about cardiac mesh models in UK Biobank. And wanted to start out with this slide of a blue whale plastinated heart, which is viewed by my colleague Martin Nash here as a sense of scale. So the heart of the blue whale is anatomically quite similar to humans, apart from its enormous size. It's also quite a bit more spherical. And I want to talk about heart shape in relation to mesh models in UK Biobank. UK Biobank really is the blue whale of cardiac imaging studies. There's a wealth of information in the images, and it can tell us a lot about heart function. But I want to dwell on mesh models because mesh models is a way of kind of distilling all the anatomical and functional information down to a very compact representation. So I'll talk about three aspects of this: disease characterization, genetic discovery, and digital twin analyses. So we know that common metrics of heart function include ejection fraction, longitudinal strain, circumferential strain, MAPSI and TAPSI. MAPSI means the mitral annulus systolic excursion, and TAPSI is the tricuspid annulus systolic excursion. And there are papers that show that strain can be more predictive of adverse events than ejection fraction in some instances, but other papers show that MAPSI may be more sensitive in strain in some applications at predicting adverse events. You can kind of see from this review article slide that ejection fraction doesn't really tell you the whole story. You can have an increase in left ventricular size and a reduced ejection fraction and a reduced global longitudinal strain, or you can have a kind of thicker heart with normal ejection fraction but lower longitudinal strain. But actually, these metrics that are commonly used don't capture all the systolic shape information that's available in cardiac MRI. So the UK Biobank 20-minute cardiac MRI protocol consists of 3 long-axis cines of 50 frames each, taken in the 4-chamber, the 2-chamber, and the 3-chamber view with their aortic valve shown here. There's a short axis stack here, which is represented by this little matrix here. And there's other scans as well that I won't have time to mention. So we're dwelling on these short axis and long axis cine acquisitions, in particular the long axis, because there's information here about where the valves are and how they move, which is important, which is not really captured in this short axis stack here. So the protocol that we've developed over the years is to automatically analyze the images with machine learning. So there's a segmentation step where we find the boundaries of the heart and the location of the valves in each of the images. And then we put these 3-dimensional points back into their 3-dimensional patient coordinate space using the DICOM headers. And then we customize the mesh model to these positions of the points for every participant. And then from the mesh models, we can derive dimension reduction methods which classify different disease types or predict incident events, which is usually measured with an area under the curve of a receiver operating characteristic curve. So these statistical shape atlas methods capture most of the 3D shape information that has been lost traditionally, and it's been shown to be more predictive of events in the multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis or more discriminative of disease in UK Biobank. So the one of the papers that I wanted to highlight was this one in PLOS One, where the code is available open source on GitHub, which does all these steps and a few more actually. So we have the images, we segment the short axis and long axis, find the landmarks, customize the biventricular mesh model in this case. And then we can convert that into a more fine resolution volumetric mesh where we can do digital twin analysis down the track. It's worth pointing out that this mesh model that we use is called a subdivision surface representation. And what that means is that there's about 388 control points which characterize the anatomy of the left and right ventricles. And those control points are customized to the contours. And then we subdivide those to get the fine resolution mesh. So the control mesh representations are now in the Biobank showcase database under data field 30099. And there's some pointers to how to use them in the notes there, and in particular the code that you need to use to subdivide the control mesh into a fine resolution mesh, which you can then visualize and play with. One of the papers which recently published by my PhD student Richard Burns looked at metrics of motion between end diastole and end systole. So we started out, we had 45,000 cases available at the time, and through various quality control measures, we ended up with nearly 40,000 that we could compare strain and MAPSI and TAPSI metrics with the shape metrics that we derive from the meshes. So for dimension reduction, we have used principal component analysis. And this, what it does is it takes the end diastole and end systole meshes in a big long column and then just does a PCA on that. So you end up with mode variations which explain the shape variance across the cohort at both end diastole and end systole. So this is the first mode, looked at from 3 different views. And the solid shaded surface is the end systolic mesh, and the wireframe is the end diastolic mesh. And you can see as we go from -2 standard deviations through the mean to +2 standard deviations from the mean, that the heart is getting smaller or bigger. And that's usually the component that we see in the first principal component. We haven't corrected for height, and we haven't corrected for size in the alignment of the meshes, because we know that heart size is an important prognostic indicator. The second principal component that pops out of this analysis is associated with the difference between end diastole and end systole, particularly around the mitral and tricuspid valves. So this is like the MAPSI and TAPSI that I was talking about before. And because this is unsupervised, it's not exactly the same as MAPSI and TAPSI, but it's showing that that is one of the big sources of variation between people in UK Biobank. Another one of them, number 10, has to do with ejection fraction. So this is the in the right ventricle. So you can kind of see as we go from one side of the distribution to the other that the ejection fraction of the right ventricle is changing. And in this one, number 13, the ejection fraction of the left ventricle as well as the right ventricle is changing. So although these are kind of described by things that we already know about, they're actually capturing all the information in the shape changes that we can get from these images. And we can show that if we do a linear discriminant analysis, trying to discriminate prevalent disease on the basis of these principal component scores in blue, we can compare that with a similar analysis where we look at traditional metrics like end-diastolic or end-systolic volume, MAPSI and TAPSI, and mass and ejection fraction and everything else. And in quite a few of the disease cases, the principal component will be more discriminative, particularly in diabetes. And we've done genetics on these principal components, and this was published last year in Nature Communications, and showing that there are novel genetic associations for cardiac traits that you can't see with just in mass and volume. And just recently, we've done digital twin analyses using these mesh models, and this is trying to pick up hidden phenotypes which are not observed, but which must be occurring because they're the kind of driving forces for these observations. So we're able to use mesh models and ECGs to get patient-specific cardiac digital twins. And this showed that for QRS duration, two of the driving forces behind that are body size, but also conduction velocity, which is a parameter which you can't observe directly. You have to compute it by matching the data in Biobank. And this showed that although body size varies between men and women, and so does QRS duration, the conduction velocity, this hidden parameter, this physiological one, was not different between men and women for that parameter. But if you look at the QC duration, the parameter there is the delayed potassium rectifier current, and that was actually different between men and women. So this is an example of how you can use these measures to get at information which is not immediately obvious from the images. So in conclusion, I hope I've described that mesh models can provide information which is missing from standard metrics of function and disease that can be used for discovery of genetic bases of remodeling and also for digital twin studies at scale. I'd like to thank the collaborators mainly at Queen Mary University, Richard Patricia and Julia Ramirez, and Stephen Peterson, who was the leader of this biobank application. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much to all of our speakers thus far. It's been really great to hear about some of the incredible progress and examples of how the data are already being used. And I think one of the big things to note here is that there's incredible efforts by each of your teams that has also been in close collaboration with UK Biobank. So although you're not technically employed by UK Biobank, you've been incredible supporters of the resource and helping us get these IDCs into the resource as well. And that opens a lot of opportunities for the research community because they don't necessarily have to work with raw imaging data. They can start to really work with the phenotypes that have been developed through these kind of sophisticated pipelines. I have seen some chats as well about people wanting to be able to still make use of that raw data. Hopefully some of the examples today about kind of improved tooling, things like Monai that we'll hear about in a bit, will show how it can potentially use that within the research analysis platform. But of course, if you're still constrained within your research, please do reach out to us as well, as we're continuously trying to improve this process as well. I want to start off with a question actually for Louise. Is one of the things that always struck me about your work is how many different organs have been segmented and how many different organs have been brought into the kind of IDP pipelines and things. And I think you would agree that there wasn't not all of those sequences were there with the intention to be able to do all those organs. So I guess one is to talk about kind of how this came about, that process of exploring different organs and how the data that are there are helping to enable that. And also in terms of how do you validate some of those measures as well to make sure that it is actually capturing what we hope it is capturing.
Yeah, so when we originally started working with the UK Biobank data, I mean, our original plan was kind of to do what we'd done before, which was very much a fat-focused measurements. But then once we started, we kind of pushed ourselves to discover anything we could. So most of our work's been very opportunistic, like the spleen iron work. I mean, we didn't set out to measure the spleen, but we had a slice through the liver to measure liver iron. And then my colleague Nick said, oh, can we try this in the spleen? So it has just been discovery. I mean, I think the way we've always looked at it, the UK Biobank volunteers come and spend an inordinate amount of time having these measurements done. And it's if we can extract every little drop of added information from that, we will do it. So there are some things we've tried that don't work. It's like the thing people ask us about most often is, can we measure thymus volume? But it's just not possible from the images. We don't have the resolution, and the thymus is something that kind of decreases as you get older. So, but pretty much everything else we've tried to go after, we've been able to measure.
No, it's incredible. It's nice to know that too, that there are all of these additional opportunities that are coming from the imaging data. And I think we should definitely be thanking the participants for their incredible time. So when we think about the length of this protocol, they're coming in for hours per day. And you've got to remember from that baseline data center collection, these people are coming from around the UK as well, traveling up over 100 miles sometimes to come for these assessments, to complete these, to be able to provide the data to the research community. So incredible to see.
I'm just going to finish off on the thing about the validation. We do still do a lot of visual QC. We always check the 50 largest, the 50 smallest, 50 in the middle. We might do additional visual QC for men and women, depending on the structures. So we don't just rely on like our DICE scores and the imaging metrics. Sometimes you get errors that come up and it turns out to be some kind of really interesting incidental finding. So it does have value in lots of ways, but we do as much QC as we can of the data for validating all our findings.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to move over to a question to Steve, and really great progress to see within Pandora as well. And I think they're kind of making more and more usable data files and data types for the kind of brain imaging community. Great to see about some of the kind of documentation available. We'll make sure all of that is linked through on the UK Biobank resources as well, because it of course there's lots of new information there to learn and from as well. So one of the things I've always found with the brain imaging data is there's a huge number of IDPs that get generated as well. So I wondered if you would just touch a little bit on kind of the process of that kind of IDP generation, some of the validation work that happens on the brain IDP front, and if there's any kind of new IDPs that you guys are working towards using the existing data as well.
Yeah, sure. I'm not really sure what the question is, but it's certainly true that there are thousands of IDPs at this point. I guess that the premise is that in general, we and others have put together this big processing pipeline that's run on behalf of Biobank that does basically what we consider to be state-of-the-art processing of each of the modalities. And the IDPs, in a sense, fall out of that. They're designed to be the most sensible summaries that you might expect to be able to extract. So, for example, when we run a tissue type segmentation of the T1 weighted image, it makes sense to try and get a simple IDPs, which are total volumes of the different tissue types. But then you immediately think, well, I'd like to apply some regional masks to those to find out in different, say, cortical regions, what is the total volume of grey matter? So that generates a kind of subset, a new set of IDPs. And then when you have something like functional connectivity and you've done the functional parcellation, then in effect, every pair of parcels, you estimate the connectivity between them, and each of those is a new IDP. So it very much kind of naturally falls out of the processing and our understanding of the way that the different modalities. Some of the recent additional IDPs that we've added in, obviously we've wanted to maintain backwards compatibility with IDP. So we've never kind of fundamentally changed or removed IDPs so far, but we have added new ones. So one obvious one is that recently there has been the ASL imaging. So we've added in new IDPs to give regional measures of blood flow. So that's a new set. Another exciting recent set was from the new QSM modeling. So it's a different way of modeling the susceptibility weighted data. And Chao Yue has done an amazing job of generating regional QSM measures. So it's always expanding as new functionality comes into the pipeline.
No, thank you, and I think you inferred the question as I intended as well. So thanks, Steve. I think one of the things I want to highlight here too is that how much work you guys have done across the teams and using the brain imaging data that's now been starting to be implemented within kind of clinical pipelines as well. We heard a little bit about that last year at the UK Biobank Scientific Conference in terms of how this is being used within memory clinics. And I think that's been really helpful, interestingly, that back and forth of how to implement these pipelines, of how we can take that further forward with how do we better enhance our kind of health outcomes in UK Biobank. So one of the things we're working together with Steve and the team is to a new brain health study where we're going to be bringing back participants with neurodegenerative conditions as well, and learning from the work that we've been doing with the brain imaging data and potentially new sequences in the future. So another exciting thing for people to look out for, and we'll be discussing that more at the scientific conference on the 8th of December as well, which people can register for online or in person opportunities if you've already registered. Thanks very much. I'm going to move over to Alistair. I mean, I think I think the cardiac mesh stuff is really exciting as well, because it's also a new space within the data that's been made available to the wider research community. There's obviously a group of researchers now working out with cardiac mesh data, and I guess I have kind of two questions. One is kind of coming around the cardiac digital twin aspect that you mentioned, and we talk about there looking at kind of surface meshes, volumetric meshes, myocardial fiber meshes, and I wonder if you could just quickly clarify in as simply as possible what the difference is and what we're looking at here with the meshes that have been provided to date.
Yeah, sure. So we had a trade-off between the amount of representation that you get and the size of the files, and so our ones are very compact. And what that means is that the control points meshes, you need to run them through a script to create the finer resolution surface meshes. I think that there's been some testing on the RAP, so that should be working. And on the GitHub for the +1 paper, there's also scripts to refine them further into volumetric meshes, which you can run electrophysiological simulations on, and those are much heavier. So we decided not to put those up, but just to provide the scripts that you can create them. And those ones are needed for the computational work of biomechanics and electrophysiology, and also mapping the orientation of the cells so that you get the anisotropic material properties and things like that. So yeah, the surface meshes, though, can be used in a lot of other applications like statistical atlasing, functional metrics, and genetics.
Yeah, and I think you gave a good example of talking about the Burns et al. Paper as well, where the meshes are picking up kind of unique associations with genetic loci as well that are not captured by conventional cardiac parameters, which I think was nice to see the value of those meshes, but also their link to different health outcomes as well. So I think there's definitely some exciting work to be done across multiple areas, and now I think making these available offers that kind of cross-collaborative research opportunities.
Yeah, and we're seeing interesting polygenic risk scores in heart failure, also atrial fibrillation, and I think we've only just started to scratch the surface, though, because particularly with diabetes, there's things that we see in the shape models which we're not really picking up with conventional metrics, and that'll be interesting down the track to kind of tease out.
Great. What do you, I mean, we've had some discussion as well that you mentioned, so within kind of atrial modeling as well, and what are some of how do you see that kind of progressing in the future? Because we're just looking at the ventricles for the time being. So how do you see that progressing, and what are some of the challenges that we'll face with atrial modeling?
Yeah, so atrial shape and function is very important, and particularly with the left atrium. But the trouble is with the cardiac MRI protocol, you don't get that much information. Like you might get 2 slices through the left atrium, but now with machine learning, we can create the full representation of the atria from sparse data. So we're experimenting with these methods, and I think very soon we'll be able to reconstruct the full geometries of the atria and mesh models for that as well.
Great, thank you. Steve, there was one other question I wanted to come back to you about, is whether it might be possible to access the pre-process resting state and task fMRI time series at the vertex level.
Yeah, sure. So they are actually, so the distinction there is that the initial pre-processing happens in 3D volumetric space, but then because fMRI really benefits from the HCP's approach of working on the cortical surface, we do follow that as of about a year ago. And so we also provide a projection of the fMRI time series onto the cortical surface. That's in a new set of zip files that's now available.
Okay, great, thank you. And then finally, before we move on to the next session, again, it's just talking for Pandora, is if we generate, the researchers asked, if we generate our own MRI phenotype maps on RAP, could we easily convert them to Pandora style to reduce voxel level information to supervoxel levels?
Yeah, so that's straightforward. I don't know if the link is live yet, but Aslan has a GitHub page with all his scripts. So that's running scikit-learn Python scripts to collate all of the individual files together into these massive HDF5 matrices. But then also to run the high dimensional ICA is all in there too, which then creates the supervoxel versions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you all. I'm sure we could continue the discussions, and I think there's lots of excitement from all of us in terms of moving forward to the kind of repeat assessments as well, and once we get into longitudinal analyses, but that will be the focus of a future symposium as well. So we're going to move on to the next session and the next speaker, which is going to be Ben Busby, who will be joining us. Ben is the Global Alliance Manager for Genomics at NVIDIA, where he focuses on building partnerships to accelerate omics solutions using advanced AI and high-performance computing. At NVIDIA, he works on integrating deep learning, knowledge graphs, and scalable genomics workflows to transform research and clinical applications across biobank scale data sets. And he also serves as an adjunct faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University. So we're very excited to have Ben here today to give kind of a Monai spotlight into looking at kind of new tooling available within the research analysis platform.
Awesome. All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Ben Busby. I work for NVIDIA. And what I'm going to try to do is give you sort of two back-to-back lightning talks. One, sort of an overview of what Monai is, what some of the features are, et cetera, et cetera. And then two, sort of give you a deep dive into the RAP, really how to implement Monai on the RAP on UK Biobank data. You know, in my opinion, I think it's really great that this came right after this panel and the other speakers. I mean, I think it'll be, I hope that I'll be able to outline really how this can be used in conjunction with the labeled data sets that Oliver was talking about, and really sort of as an adjuvant to some of the things Steve was talking about. So, hopefully that'll become clear over the talk, and I'll have contact information for both myself and some folks that work on the RAP at the end of this presentation. So please feel free to reach out. So first, what is Monai? So Monai is a framework to be able to, let me back up a little bit. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'll give an introduction to the project, and then, like I said, I'll do a deep dive into what we are doing in the RAP. So AI for medical imaging has a bunch of requirements, and we're at NVIDIA, we're really interested in partnering with the community to work on having an imaging framework. And I'll say that several other times, that this isn't really an NVIDIA thing, but it's really a community thing that we help accelerate. Obviously, imaging is really essential to everything we do. And I am primarily a genomics person, but as you've heard several times from the panelists and others, bouncing say PRS off of imaging and vice versa really helps us understand etiologies and really sort of precise medical definitions. So back to this slide. What is Monai? So Monai is a collection of modules which we can then use to develop models for understanding imaging in a phenotypic context, and then be able to deploy those both in a research sense, but then also in a clinical sense. And so NVIDIA really, like I mentioned, has accelerated all of these things, both Monai label, which I'll show you specific examples of how that can be used to label data in the UK Biobank, as well as other functionality that Monai offers that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, we fully support this. And really, this can be adopted across the entire ecosystem. So in UK Biobank, but in other systems as well. If you're working with other data types, this is a flexible framework that can really be adopted pretty much anywhere. Obviously, it's available on the RAP at this point. And really, we have, I think at this point, about 5 million downloads. So it's really very widespread over the medical imaging community. That said, there's a whole bunch of people on the advisory board, and these people really lead teams that meet monthly and plan out directions for the Monai project. And that's something we're really proud of, that this is really a very large, wide-ranging community effort. So there's a bunch of different workflows that Monai supports. It's a very sort of large network project. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know about, it's very easy to generate synthetic data. Also very easy to employ segmentation models. federated learning isn't really front and center for UK Biobank yet, but that's, of course, one possible future and something that a lot of people are very interested in working on. So just to highlight a few things there. In terms of generative AI, this is very exciting to me because really we can start really sort of informing and tuning models for Gen AI in both the imaging and phenotypic space. So that's really very cool. But one of the coolest things is, we can now start moving beyond completely manual annotation to AI-assisted annotation. And I think that's one of the most active areas of development in the entire Monai project, is really working on AI-assisted annotation. Monai works on a whole bunch of different data types, as you can see here. And one of the things, so I used to do scientific strategy for the UKB-RAP. When we asked users of the RAP what software they needed, one of the biggest things people asked for was 3D Slicer. And so I'll show you a little bit of a demonstration later of how to integrate Monai into 3D Slicer on the RAP. I mentioned segmentation models before. This is a really nice thing. We can train segmentation models really quite easily using the Monai framework. And that's a very nice thing. And in my personal opinion, we're all moving towards federated learning. Monai integrates with another framework that NVIDIA supports called NVFlare. And obviously, we're very interested in moving from AI over to deployment in the clinic. And so we have modules for that. For those of you who are on sort of the clinical side of things, we want to really outline that this is an option for you. So in hospital infrastructure, for example. Great. So let me talk a little bit about features before I do kind of a deep dive into offerings on the RAP per se. So again, this is Monai, and you can see really the full stack here. This is really for informational purposes, but really the most exciting thing is that there is an entire model zoo. So there is probably a model that's very close to things you want to do. Not in everybody's case, but certainly in many cases. And so I really encourage you to check out the model zoo. Some of the models are preloaded onto the RAP. Others can be accessed through interfaces like Hugging Face. I'll show you examples of that later, but I think that's really, really very exciting. As I mentioned, Label is available, and I'm really excited about the fact that this is extremely easy to use on the RAP. There's a bunch of core functionality for those of you who are a little bit deeper into things, and as I mentioned, we have deploy for those of you more in the clinical space. So that said, if you're interested in sort of the larger Monai community, you can check out this QR code, or obviously this link is a little bit dated with Twitter, but check out some of the social media offerings as well. That said, I want to dive into sort of a second lightning talk, really diving into actual use of Monai tools on the RAP. And I'd really like to thank my colleagues at DNA Nexus for providing these slides and really sort of echoing the growing the growing footprint of image analysis on the RAP, which is something I'm personally very excited about. So we'll talk a little bit, as I mentioned, about 3D Slicer with Monai Label, and then there's even a 3D Slicer standalone on the RAP. There's really a Swiss Army knife now for Monai Core, which I think is really cool. A lot of you have probably used the sort of traditional sort of RAP DNA Nexus Swiss Army knife. I think it's really cool that sort of the RAP is moving into integrating imaging data. And of course, we have Jupyter Lab features, as I've talked about in previous talks on the RAP, etc. Excellent. All right, so imaging tools were just updated yesterday. So now there is an imaging multi-tool on the REP. So this allows you to implement a whole bunch of features that are in Monai very easily in a self-contained app that is ready to run. So to me, that's a very exciting thing and an exciting development sort of onto the REP. And then, as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of Jupyter Lab features. I think probably a bunch of you have used these already. They really help you generate static images as well as do really basic analysis in terms of image processing. So I think that's particularly cool. I think most of you are aware of how to launch Jupyter Lab, but just so you know, there's a Monai ML feature in the Jupyter Lab interface now. And I would suggest running that on high priority on the rep. And so then you can check, you can put a specific slicer kernel if that's something you want to do. And then there's a whole bunch of demonstration Jupyter Labs that you can build off of. I mean, as data scientists, as you know, it's way easier to build off existing Jupyter notebooks if that's something relatively straightforward you want to do. By the way, scikit-learn was mentioned earlier. There is a GPU accelerated version of scikit-learn. If that's something you're interested in, please check it out. All right, so like I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of demo notebooks available on the RAP, so you can check these out and open them up in the Jupyter Lab interface. That hopefully that is helpful to you. Here you can try also pre-trained models for auto segmentation. I'm glancing at some of the questions in the chat, and I see that some people have run into challenges running segmentation models. I'd advise you to check out these models, but also I will provide an email address at the end for folks working on the REP. Please send them direct questions. That would be great. And so here you can see examples of running some labeling on the actual RAP. So that's pretty cool. And you can see some of the displays that are available to you. Here you can save annotations. I think that's really, really cool. And so you almost have a sort of human in the loop model training in this particular case. That's something that I hope will be very valuable to a number of RAP users. In terms of model training, obviously there's a model zoo. There's a bunch of models preloaded on the RAP, but you can also go out and grab initial models or introduce your own custom models. I think that's really cool, and you can import these. These slides should become available, and so you should be able to follow some of the directions here. You can also grab things off Hugging Face. You can make your own custom models. I think that's particularly useful as well. Here's a couple of nuances about using zip models on the RAP. Zip files on the RAP. You can go ahead and do that. And then here is a little tutorial on sort of a new interface in terms of launching 3D Slicer with Monai Label. I gave a webinar on this last December, so certainly something to check out. There's a step-by-step tutorial there, but it's even easier now. Really, I'd check out the interface if possible. And obviously you use the sort of normal RAP interface command for both sort of NIPD and DICOM files for this kind of thing. It's really nice that there's interactive visualizations in terms of 3D Slicer. That's something that I'm very happy that DNA Nexus has made available on the RAP in really sort of compartmentalized apps at this point. And these slides just walk through how to think about doing that kind of thing and implementing sort of annotations in a model. So finally, there's a file manager for these kinds of data sets that you can use. And then here you can see updated models and upload them to your project. So finally, as I mentioned several times, and you can, like I said, you can upload files to your project. As I mentioned several times, please, if you have questions, please email ukbsupport@dnanexus.com with those questions. If you have questions about data availability, exceptions, etc., please email folks from the UK Biobank. And then if you have general questions about Monai, please go ahead and hit the NVIDIA Monai forum. If you're interested in bouncing if you're interested in bouncing genomic data off of imaging data, so on and so forth, for precision medicine, please feel free to contact me or reach out to the researchers who spoke on the panel earlier. Really some amazing papers there and something very exciting to see. So that's fantastic. And then it's really sort of kudos to the organizers for putting the talks together in this order, because really there will be a demonstration of some of the things I did an overview on next from the UK Biobank team. So really appreciate everybody being here, and really for all of the work that you do. In my personal opinion, these are some of the most significant things we can be doing sort of with our time for the betterment of humanity. So thank you again, and have a great rest of the day.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben, for that. And absolutely, we're going to be hearing now from Lea Maria, who's a senior data analyst at UK Biobank, specializing in health data science and bioinformatics. And she works on optimizing the cloud-based tools, developing analytic workflows, and supporting researchers through the UKB-RAP as well. So we're going to hear now a little bit more about kind of diving a little bit deeper into the UKB-RAP, and also in terms of utilizing some of the tools that we've just seen highlighted by Ben. So Lea, I'll hand over to you, and looking forward to hearing more about that.
Thank you, Adam, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. So in this presentation, I'm going to walk you through the UK Biobank Research Analysis Platform, or the UKB-RAP, and especially going through the new imaging tools, as well as the GitHub resources and the tutorials that are provided by UK Biobank to the researchers community. So this is a brief agenda of what we're going to cover today. So first, we're going to start with an overview of the platform and the tools available in the UKB-RAP. Next, I will walk you through the imaging analysis that you can perform on the RAP, and this includes using 3D Slicer and Monai label. And finally, we will look at how you can build your own tools on the RAP and share them with others. So the UKB-RAP is a cloud-based platform. This means that UK Biobank data and analysis take place within the cloud, which is accessed from your institution and your local computer. Data is stored on the cloud, and analysis is done in a temporary instance on the cloud. There are various ways in which you can interact with the UKB-RAP, and this includes the cohort browsers, that allow you to explore and visualize the phenotypic data. You can filter on specific data fields and look out for the distribution if you're interested. You can also generate and refine cohorts as well as analyzing genetic variants. The UKB-RAP also provides the tools library where there is a variety of imaging and bioinformatics tools, as well as table exporter. That is a tool that allows you to extract the phenotypic data into a tabular data format, as well as RStudio and Jupyter Lab, that can launch interactively, where you can perform your code and analysis on them. You can also interact directly with the command line. The DNA Nexus also provides the DX toolkit that provides a variety of tools to interact with your project, as well as your job and the instances that you are working on. You can monitor them and look at their progress. And finally, you can also build your own tools on the RAP and share them with others. And this includes building applets and Docker images. And now with the latest and largest imaging release, we have introduced new tools on the UKB-RAP to support the researchers in performing their imaging analysis. So Ben already has introduced Monai and 3D Slicer, and I'm going to walk with you through a tutorial on how you can use them on the RAP. So next, I'm going to show you how you can perform your analysis using these tools. So there are multiple tools that are available for you to perform your imaging analysis, and this goes from visualization to development and then deployment. So ideally for visualization, 3D Slicer would be the optimal tool. In the case of deployment, Monai would be good with the AI-assisted techniques that are available, in addition to Jupyter, as well as the additional feature that you can use within it, such as FSL and FreeSurfer, as well as Monai. In terms of deployment, the DNA Nexus also provides a variety of tools that includes Swiss Army knife, applets, Docker images, and many other tools. So first, in terms of viewing images on the UKB-RAP, you can use 3D Slicer. Why would you want to use this tool? Basically, it allows you to visualize and explore multimodality imaging data, and this can be in 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, as well as volume rendering views. You can also perform interactive segmentations of anatomical structures using a variety of tools, as well as execute the registration of images from different time points, modalities, or subjects. And there's a lot more that you can do with 3D Slicer. The tool also is accompanied by a really detailed documentation that you can directly see on the RAP, as well as information on the inputs that are needed to launch this app. So you can view DICOM and process Nifty images that are provided by UK Biobank. The app will start a web browser that's going to be an interactive session with 3D Slicer, volume visualization, and annotation tool. There's also a step-by-step tutorial to view the images with 3D Slicer that we have made available on the community forum that you can access it, and shows also really useful use cases on how you can use 3D Slicer. So here I'm going to walk you through a short tutorial on how you can run 3D Slicer and import DICOM images. So you can access 3D Slicer from the tools library. This is where you can see also the app information as well as documentation on how to run the tool. Once you click on Run, you'll be able to specify the job name and where you want the outputs of your job to be at. After that, you will have to select the inputs that you need for your job. So this will basically initially include the input files. It is really important to know how the data is structured, the imaging data is structured on the RAP. So all the imaging data is present in the bulk folder, and where there are specific folders for the different imaging modality. You have a single file per individual. These are zip files for DICOM and Nifty images. And the image and the file will be structured where you have the EID, the field ID, followed by the instance index and the array index. As input for the 3D Slicer, you can either select all of the input files that you're interested in. However, considering that UK Biobank has thousands of images, you can also prepare a manifest of files that will list all of the files that you want to provide as input. So this will be in the structure of your project ID followed by your file ID. After selecting your input files, you would want to set, you can select an option of true or false in order if you want to download your input files to your instance or you want to mount them. The default is false, and mounting them will have them as a read-only option. It's really also important to set your environment duration. The environment duration should not be really short, so it allows you time to perform your analysis and ensure that once you've done them, having everything uploaded back to your project, because everything that's within your job is going to be in this project storage, and you'll have to save them back, whether it's your labels and your segmentations, back to your project. So after you selected your environment duration and selected your input files, you can start your analysis. You still need to select the options that are specific to your job. So this includes the priority and the size of your instance. In terms of priority, this can be either low, normal, and high. However, a high priority is recommended to allow non-interruptions for your instance. In terms of size, also a bigger instance size is recommended, although it might be more expensive, but slightly, not a really big difference, in order to reduce the booting time for your session. So the booting time will mainly be affected by the number of input files that you have and the availability of the instance. After selecting these options, you'll be able to monitor your job directly in the Monitor tab within your project, where you have information on whether it started running, as well as the duration and the cost. On the right, you can also view the log of your job. So this will include information on whether your job is running into errors, on whether it's running, etc. And you'll have to wait until it prints out 3D Slicer started for you to be able to launch your job. You can then click on Open, and the interactive session will open. In the next slide, I'm going to show you a screen recording of an example of where I'm loading a DICOM image for the abdominal MRI. So it's the Dixon images. So you're going to see how I'm going to import them, and they are going to be loaded into the DICOM database. So in here, in the top bar, I click on dicom.zip, I select the file, and then this will redirect me to the DICOM database, where the zip archive is going to be loaded. Then I load the patient. In this specific case, it's a single file for a single participant, but you might have a selection of other files. So in this case, you'll have different patient names. So now all of the studies are being loaded, and they are now loaded onto 3D Slicer, where you can visualize them. And this will be more interactive into where you can label the images and segment them. In addition to 3D Slicer, Monai label is also released. Also, Ben has provided a lot of information on it. So basically, why would you want to use it? So Monai is particularly valuable to use with UK Biobank for it being a large-scale data set, which contains thousands of images for participants, making manual segmentation of each individual impractical. So you can actually accelerate the data labeling using the AI-assisted techniques provided by Monai to quickly and accurately annotate this large imaging data set. You can also implement active learning workflow by improving models through training on newly labeled data, as well as validating and testing pre-trained Monai labels or Monai bundles on the project data. And there's definitely more that you can do with Monai, and additional documentation also comes with the tool. To apply Monai on UKB-RAP, it's also integrated with 3D Slicer. So in terms of launching it, it's going to be similar to 3D Slicer, where you can access it from your tools library. In addition to 3D Slicer, it gives you intelligent segmentation workflows with the pre-trained models that are already provided by Monai. On the community forum, you can also find a step-by-step tutorial that walks you through using Monai on the app. So Monai is available now in 3 ways. So where you have the standalone tool, where it is integrated with 3D Slicer, you have the imaging multi-tool, as well as Jupyter, where Monai is an extension of Jupyter Lab. So being integrated with 3D Slicer, the loading of the DICOM and the Nifty images and the labeling is going to be similar to 3D Slicer. However, in terms of inputs, in addition to providing the images as input files, you'll also have to provide the label inputs So labels would be labels that you might have uploaded from a previous instance of using Monai. So these would be saved on your project, and you will upload them back onto a new instance to be able to continue your work and analysis. You will also have to select the model input. So the models are other pre-trained model names that are already available and provided by Monai. They can be also Monai bundle files, and they can also be a custom model that you developed yourself. So in terms of pre-trained model, you have the deep edit and deep grow that are the based models. You have the segmentation spleen. These would be specific to other organs. In terms of Monai bundles, you have, for example, the whole brain segmentation, a model that allows you to segment the brain. What is really important to know is that UK Biobank has only MRI images and does not have CT scans. So this is why you might want to use the bundles that are specific for MRI. So now I'm going to show you an example on how you can run Monai on the RAP, and specifically with a field, the T1 structured brain image that is in Nifty format. So in terms of Monai, you will have to provide a file. In this case, I've also provided a single example file. However, you can also provide a manifest file listing all of the files that you want to analyze. You also need to select the pre-trained model or the bundle file. So in this case, I've selected the whole brain segmentation bundle. And then in terms of image input, knowing that UK Biobank images are in zip formats on the RAP, there's two options that you need to select that depend on whether your image is a Nifty image or a DICOM image. In the case where it's a Nifty image, you will have to provide the path to the image file that is within the zip archive. So in this case, I gave the file with the MNI image. However, you can provide also different path if you're interested in multiple Nifty files for these individuals. In the case of using a DICOM image, you need to set the flag to true on use DICOM image file format. So either of these fields need to be mandatory filled in the case of using either a DICOM or a Nifty image. And what's also really important to know is that you cannot mix DICOM and Nifty images as input. So it should be either analyzing Nifties or analyzing DICOMs. Otherwise, in terms of setting the job priority and size, it's similar to 3D Slicer. The only addition would be that you have additional inputs for the job itself, and the launching might take longer because you're also providing a model as an input. Within your interactive session, you will also see that you have a Monai extension as well as a DNA Nexus extension. So in the Monai extension, this is where you perform your analysis, you will run your model, perform the segmentation, and train your model. In the DNA Nexus extension, this is where you will be working with your project on the RAP and uploading the labels and models and the updated models that you've trained back to your project. So this is a screen recording where I'm showing you how you can load Nifty images. This is simpler than DICOM images, where you only have to select them. And here you just click yes, and they are loaded, and you click OK, and they'll be loaded directly onto your session. So this is where you will see an impact of the instance size that you've selected initially. A bigger instance size will mean that all of this loading will be faster than a smaller instance size. So here, after uploading my image, I've moved to the Monai extension, where you can see the model having loaded. When you click on Next Sample, this is where you'll be able to visualize the image that you've loaded. In the case of having multiple images being loaded, you can move to the next image by clicking on Next Sample. So in this case, I've loaded a single image that you can see here. After loading my image, you can see in the Options section, this is the model that you've loaded. So this will show you the name. You can see the active learning that's now at 0% because I haven't started segmenting yet. In the segment editor, you will see the different colors that would be for the different labels of the organ. Then when I click Run, I'm actually applying the pre-trained model that I have loaded to the image that I have here. So also the running of the model on the images will also be affected by the instance size that you had initially in your input. So this is after I run my model. It looks like a really nice segmentation. This means that the model has worked really well. In the case where this is not completely accurate and you want to change, you can definitely manually annotate the images yourself, change some colors, etc., where you have different tools that allow you to change these. After that, once you're happy with your labels, you can just click on submit your label, and this will save your label onto in your job, in your current session. So you can see how the active learning is increasing because I'm training my model now on the labels that I've been saving in this current session. So after that, considering the fact that all of these labels are just saved in this session, and you want to save them back into your project space before your environment duration ends, you'll have to go to the DNA Nexus extension in the top of the bar, and then you refresh to load, to select the project that you are working on. In Manage, you can see all of the files that you've been uploading back to your project. Now it's empty. So I'm uploading my labels by clicking Upload Labels, and this is where you can follow the progress on them being saved back to your project. And once the status is complete, you know that you can find these in your UKB-RAP project. So it's really important to do the step before you terminate your session, either manually or once the duration is done, to make sure that all of your progress has been saved. So now that I've walked you through how to use Monai Label interactively, you can also use Monai Label using Jupyter Notebooks. So as mentioned earlier, notebooks are available on the UK Biobank GitHub. There are 3 notebooks that are available. The first one allows you to extract and register a T1 defaced image to MNI. And the other 2 would allow you to work with Nifty images and DICOM images on Jupyter Notebook using Monai. So with these, you can start a Monai server. You can use Monai bundled to auto-segment the image, and you can visualize it and edit the annotations, as well as training the model and upload the labels back to your UKB-RAP project. So this is similar to what I showed you earlier. However, you do this directly through a Jupyter Notebook instead of it being interactive. In addition to Monai, you can also perform brain imaging analysis using FreeSurfer and FSL tools on Jupyter Lab. So these tools are available in the image processing feature within Jupyter Lab, and it allows you to work with command line tools. There's also a step-by-step tutorial that's available on the UK Biobank Community forum to run these tools. So for visualization in this case, you can use Python libraries like Matplotlib and AnaiBible. You can also perform brain extraction, image registration, and segmentation. So now this is the last section where I'm going to walk you through how you can build your own tools on the RAP, and this can be done through Docker images, applets, and how you can then share them with others. So Docker images, why are they important? Mainly, they allow you to encapsulate environments. So this means that all of your files, configurations, and dependencies of a single application are all together. So you can maintain the versioning of an application. So this will ensure reproducibility. It's also really flexible to use, as you can directly pull a Docker image from Docker Hub or private repositories. You can build your own, and you can also enable workflows, which is ideal if you want to develop apps, pipelines, and reproducible research. So a use case of this is Pandora. So Pandora data is now available and can be accessed on the RAP, and Steve went through it in his really nice talk. So to maximize the utility of Pandora and the ability of people to engage with the tool, we packaged Pandora into a Docker image, which helps streamline its use for its application on UK Biobank data. So it has been built into a Docker image and to use in conjunction with Swiss Army knife on the RAP to run the FSL GLM regression. Why would you want to? Why did we package it into a Docker image? This allows for efficiency. So it avoids the launching of an instance on the RAP and manually downloading and extracting the tar files. It is scalable, as you can easily submit multiple analyses in parallel using Swiss Army knife jobs. It is also reproducible and reliable, as all dependencies, that includes the tool, the script, and the path, are fixed inside the Docker image. So the directory tree will be built automatically, and missing arguments will trigger an error instead of silently failing. In addition to Docker images, you can also build your own applets. These are really useful as they are mainly a bundle of scripts and dependencies. So it's like you are running an application directly on the RAP, similar to the tools that are already available. You can parameterize your inputs, so which enables scalability. They are repeatable, parallelizable, and they run as a non-interactive jobs. So this means that you only pay for the time your applet is running. And they are available to build with R, Python, and Bash apps. The DX Toolkit also provides you with command line tools to be able to build your applet and bring it into the RAP. So there's the DX app wizard command that builds the skeleton file of your applet. So this will be the separate folders where you will put in your code, build your applet, and once you're ready, you can use a command line DX build that will bring it directly onto the RAP, and the DX run will allow you to run your applet on the RAP. So an example for that is the step count tool. So the step count tool is a work done by the Ox Variables group, where they have used self-supervised learning on UK Biobank data. The step count tool provides step counts, cadence, and walking patterns, and it processes individual level accelerometry files. The group has also made the tool as a DNA Nexus applet that is readily and publicly available to use on the RAP. So the thing with the tool is that it takes as input a single accelerometry file. But considering that UK Biobank has thousands of files, in this case, if you want to run the tool on over 50,000 files, running the tool on every file separately would make an issue, and it will take longer. So to do this, there's two different strategies that you have applied. The first one would be on running this single applet that's already available in parallel. So instead of running them successively, it's like you're launching multiple instances all running in parallel together. So this is really cost effective. It's really, really cheap per file. The time for an applet to run on a file is also really low. It just depends on the size of files. So this is only a few minutes. However, the issue with that is that there will be multiple launching and booting times. So it will be one per file, and you will have multiple instances that are just showing on your monitor tab. So another strategy for that, it will be to have a single applet that will run for multiple files, and the tool itself within the applet will be running in parallel. So this means that multiple files will be processed in one applet. This will have a bit of higher cost compared to the initial strategy. However, it's really efficient in the case where you want to run it on multiple files. And this means that you will have only a single boot time for all of these files. So these are different strategies that you've also made available on the UK Biobank GitHub and that you can access them there. And these are really useful use cases that you can apply also for your own tools. So these would be good ideas for you to have an idea on how you can efficiently run your tools on thousands of files. So these tools are available on the GitHub in the imaging and machine learning repo. So you can see a description on what's available. So far, we have the step count tool and we have Monai label. The Docker image from Pandora will be released very soon. So this repository is actively maintained, and we continuously add new content and improve the existing workflows. So if you have a tool that you'd like to share and make available on our GitHub, please reach out, and we'd be really happy to collaborate. So I'll hand back to Adam, and thank you everyone for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Lea, for that insight and the discussion and demonstration of that. And I think just so that everyone is aware is that we will have all of the content available through the community, and we'll have a chance to ask some additional questions at the end of the session today, but also that you can raise those questions on the community forum as well. I'm going to hand over back to Ollie now to have a bit of a discussion for imaging for early career researchers. And then at the end of Ollie's talk, Lea, Ollie, and I will be on stage to answer some final questions for today. So over to you, Ollie.
Great, thank you very much, Adam, and thanks, Lea, for taking us through that. So I'm going to talk about guidance for access and particularly focusing on early career researchers. So I'd like to try and address the big challenges and concerns that might affect an early career researcher in this talk. So this is thinking back to my days of doing my PhD and my postdoc in particular, and thinking about the major relevant features that kind of scared me in getting involved in new data. So I'm going to talk about accessing the data, funding your storage and your analysis, learning, training, and getting help, and then sharing data between collaborators on your AMS project, and publishing data and publishing images in particular. So let's start with accessing the data. So this is a crucial feature. Accessibility of the data is a crucial feature of UK Biobank's work, and UK Biobank is a global data resource, and the storage, compute, and access models need to reflect that global status, but they also need to work for the individual users who are trying to access the data and do the research that is the lifeblood of their careers. So we have a full kind of understanding of that and a kind of empathy for that. In 2024, we built on the launch of the RAP in 2021 by transitioning to a RAP platform by default model. So this change was driven by the increasing size and complexity of the data, as well as a growing regulatory and security features. Today, over 15,000 users are registered to use the platform, and more than 1,500 research applications are actively using the platform each month. The platform brings researchers to the data and the compute, and ensures a scalable, efficient, and compliant access with all of the regulations that we're required to adhere to. In terms of getting access to the data, you need to follow this journey. So filling in an application form and being registered, adding your collaborators to your project, adding contact information for a signatory who's authorized to sign an agreement with UK Biobank. This can't be your PI or your collaborator. And then the UK Biobank team will review your application and contact you via AMS with any feedback. On approval, your application, an access fee request will be raised, and the transfer agreement will be sent to you and the signatory. And the time taken to get through this process really often hinges on that stage of the process. So how quickly can an organization turn around one of those agreements and process a payment through for your research? We try and make that stage as easy and as clear as possible, but it generally takes about 13 weeks. Recently, we've introduced 4 introductory training courses that are a prerequisite to complete before accessing the data on UKB-RAP. The training courses consist of the MRC Research GDPR and Confidentiality course, an introduction to using UK Biobank data, and this covers the data types and resources available. And an introduction to UKB-RAP, which guides you on how to start analyzing data, choosing your tools, and balancing speed and cost. And finally, an introduction to the use of code repositories and the UK Biobank data. Over 16,000 researchers have completed this training, set of training since its launch in September. So in terms of accessing your access, managing your project is really important. So keeping up your details up to date, submitting extensions, reports on what you're up to annually, alerting us to publications, and then returning results to us. Okay, so that kind of covers, hopefully, a lot of the fundamentals in terms of accessing the data. Funding-wise, I'd like to talk about that next. The model for billing on UK Biobank RAP is relatively simple, but it's worth explaining. With respect to storage, UK Biobank covers all data dispensed by default in a UK Biobank project. All other data that's saved to the platform, including non-UK Biobank data that's been uploaded, data that's been derived from that UK Biobank data, that's paid for by the user. The settings tab here on your UK Biobank project describes the relative amount of storage in each one of these categories. So sponsored storage is storage that UK Biobank pays for. Standard storage is storage that the user pays for. and it provides a description of the monthly anticipated cost of that storage. In contrast, the Monitor tab provides details of job and compute related storage. So each job has an associated cost, varying amounts, and these are each listed there, so they should be very easy to track. UK Biobank has 4 types of funding support for researchers. These include the Platform Credits Programme, the Transition Credits Programme, Global Researcher Access Fund, and a sign-up credits scheme for each user. The Platform Credits Programme is provided courtesy of AWS, and they provide up to £500,000 a year across all researchers to explore UKB-RAP test tools and analyze data. And that is specifically for those from early career researchers and those in low and middle income countries. So this constitutes £1,000 in getting started credits for eligible researchers, and enhanced credit grants can be requested in multiples of 1,000 for researchers requiring further assistance. The Transition Credits Programme is pretty newly launched, and this helps support the transition to the platform by default approach. So you've been working on a HPC or your local compute, and you need help to transition, refactor code, data into a cloud-ready model. This £500,000 total fund, courtesy of Wellcome, is available to all researchers who are unable to use the AWS provided credits, and can be applied for in a similar way to the Platform Credits Programme. You should get details on that QR code there. Simply, the sign-up credits for each user, when you sign on to the RAP for the first time, you get £40 of free credit when registering for the platform. This does need to be used over a certain period of time, but this is ideal for exploring the bare basics of the platform and following the tutorials, for example, that we provide on our GitHub. Should be plenty of money to cover what we're advising there to learn about the platform. Lastly, the Global Researcher Access Fund, again from researchers from less wealthy countries, but please email access at UK Biobank for details of that. Okay, in terms of learning, training, and help, there are amongst others, four very good resources, and we've talked about a few of them today already. The UK Biobank Community site, the GitHub site, both from a UK Biobank and from a DNA Nexus perspective. There is the DNA Nexus Git book, which has UKB-RAP specific documentation, and that is fantastically detailed, and there's frequently asked questions there. And then increasingly videos both about UK Biobank and also about how to perform analyses on the UK Biobank RAP. As Lea said, these GitHub sites and the UK Biobank community in particular are really actively maintained, and the UK Biobank community has a forum on which you can post public questions, and other researchers and the UK Biobank team will get back to you on those sites. Similarly, on GitHub, the UK Biobank GitHub has an issues tab, and any problems that you experience with the notebooks that are provided there, or the tools that are provided there, you can provide direct linked reporting of the problems that you identify, and we'll try and resolve those as quickly as we possibly can. Here's a rundown of all the different application repositories that are on the UK Biobank GitHub. So we have basics in terms of accessing data, and this includes a lot of the tabular data access, but it does include also about finding out what bulk files are available in that bulk file folder that Lea described on the command line. We have SNP filtering for some genetic analyses, the UKB-RAP imaging machine learning repository, and I really encourage you to star and follow this and watch this repository, because it's a recent addition, but a really expanding and actively working repository. Similarly with genomics, there are a lot of details there and workflows that you can follow to work with genomics tools. Lea presented this step count example earlier, but it's just really just to illustrate the documentation that's provided in each one of those repositories. We're trying to make it as clear as possible. So if anything is correct but not clear, that's good enough for us to try and fix it. So please report that to us via Zendesk or via the GitHub issues tabs. I already mentioned the community forum, but really encourage you to collaborate on the community forum, ask your questions publicly. You can submit a request privately, but we really encourage public questions, because that way we only have to answer well once, and that will really help us get the message out to as many researchers as possible. This is an example of the getting started guides that are available on the community, and I really want to encourage you to use these. The community has different subsections on this breadcrumb approach here, and there is an imaging section. There is this getting started section. This follow button is really valuable, because you can see all the new articles that come out in that area. So if you're interested in imaging, you can follow the imaging article area, and any new articles that get published there, you'll be alerted to those via email. Similarly, if you're a principal investigator, then you may want to follow this area. Yeah, you can really customize it to be a really useful resource for yourself. Okay, sharing. Lea, I think, described this this workflow earlier about the RAP and creating a project and exploring data and building cohorts and processing bulk files and performing your analyses. I really just want to touch on sharing your project with your specified collaborators. I should note that it's not possible to share your data on your RAP project with anyone outside of your AMS defined list of collaborators. But it is possible to share it with those who are listed. And you do that by clicking this on the user interface, by clicking this kind of share button here. And you'll see a pop-up that allows you to specify the username or email address of the user who you'd like to share with. And that will enable you to set this access drop-down button, will allow you to specify the permissions that are available to that researcher. You can also specify from the command line who you want to give access to, and change access permissions on an individual basis according to their username. You specify your project ID here and what permission you want to provide them with. Please restrict admin access to those who are responsible for the UKB-RAP project. So this is most likely the PI or a delegate of your UKB-RAP AMS project. This method with the UKB-RAP by default model, we now have a relatively new method of for researchers to return data to us. I should note, we only require return data for key individual level variables that are derived from the bulk or linked data. So examples of this include imaging derived phenotypes, individual level metrics from, say, the accelerometry data, algorithmically defined health outcomes from the health record data, linked data generated from things like geographical metrics from other data providers, and then polygenic risk scores from genetic data. Your returning of these data doesn't necessarily kind of immediately make those data available. A lot of the time it takes us a while to turn these around, and at the moment we're locked into showcase refreshes. So please bear with us, and we are trying to work on this actively at the moment. In order to make these returns and this new method, please add org-UKB reviewers to your project using the method that I specified just now, and really specifically clearly direct us to the files that you want to return. So create a folder within your app project called return for UK Biobank, and that needs to contain a comprehensive description of the data in, say, a README, and crucially a data dictionary describing what you are returning to us. If the data isn't in this format, we just won't go and get the data. Okay, in terms of a shared project, the Monitor tab also provides you details of who's doing what. So I just thought this would be useful to show for people that kind of are getting used to this for the first time. You can see who's running what jobs, who's spending the budget, and you can replicate input parameters for jobs. So if you want to rerun exactly the thing that your colleague reran the tool that your colleague reran yesterday with exactly the same input parameters, you can do that from this screen. Okay, lastly, I just want to touch on publishing. Submitting publications. So we know that publishing is a kind of major feature of an early career researcher's pressure on them a lot of the time. And we understand that images form a really fundamental aspect of publications on the UK Biobank imaging data. So we have some simple guidance to follow when publishing. Firstly, please include an acknowledgement of UK Biobank, the UK Biobank resource, and critically the application number under which that bit of research was conducted. If you're planning a press release, please contact the communications at UK Biobank to announce your paper. And even if you don't have a press release, this is a good thing to do for any high-profile paper. Please also add the acknowledgement for any UKB images in your paper. So this is particularly important because it lets us know which of our images are useful to the community. So this is a good feedback mechanism for us. And lastly, really important to minimize the image publication that you do. If we find a lot of images published unnecessarily, we'll ask for those to be taken down. And so really we want you to be able to communicate your message using the least amount of UK Biobank data as possible. And critically, that should be fully anonymized. So we don't want any IDs or any link back to the rest of the cohort whatsoever. So avoid compromising participants' pseudonymization, illustrate the science, but yes, please, please, please engage audiences and tell them about UK Biobank and why it's so fantastic. So with that, I'd just like to thank our core funders and again, thank our participants. And Adam, if I could hand back to you, that would be fantastic.
All right, thank you very much, Ollie. Again, lots of information here. So just to make everyone aware, once again, that all of this will be available through the community forums, including the recordings and additional information related to the sessions, but also in terms of how to make use of the data. More coming out as well in terms of the data release documentation that we'll be creating. I think what I wanted to start with was just a question that came through in the chat that perhaps one of you could just clarify for the researchers about this. There's a question about that says here, I was wondering is there a way to download and reuse your derived results you're generating in UK Biobank, or will it stay exclusively in UK Biobank?
Yeah, so I can probably touch on this. So as part of this UKB-RAP by default model, all downloading of individual level data is not permitted without an exemption. So unless you're specifically have a record of being allowed to do this through the access team, then individual level data shouldn't be downloaded. Summary level data, we have policies on the community to describe the full policy. So I won't go into too much more detail about it, but summary level data, which can't be tied back at all to the rest of the resource, can be downloaded from the RAP. But it is worth just consulting that policy before you do that to make sure that you're covered.
Great, thank you. One of the things I think that we've started to be able to do is kind of develop some of the image-derived phenotypes that look of particular interest from the community in-house as well. So I just want to flag to people here too that if there are kind of publications coming out of specific image-derived phenotypes that look to be of interest that aren't currently available to the wider research community, or at least in large numbers, is to also raise that to us so that we can investigate a bit, so that we can potentially see how that may be able to be included within the resource in the future as well. I don't know if either Ollie or Lea, if you wanted to touch on that a little bit in terms of some of the work that's been done internally as well.
Yeah, perhaps I could just start by talking about what kind of criteria we have for thinking about those things, and then Lea, maybe you could talk about one of the examples that we've done with Wenj's work. So yeah, both in terms of including data in the resource and also looking ourselves to expand upon the data sets that we have returned, we look to have really open source data, processes that are scalable. So it's not going to cost millions to run 160,000 participants through. Clarity of documentation, both for us and also for the rest of the community, and kind of collaboration with the researchers. So all those features really affect inclusion, both in the main UK Biobank data resource, but also inclusion of kind of pipelines and things potentially for expansion.
In the case of implementing, so we are really encouraging researchers to publish the pipelines that they've used to derive their own IDPs, because we're also building them in-house to apply it to being able to expand them on the rest of the participants that we have, considering the cost, etc. So in the case of Wenj's, we have applied the cardiac pipeline in-house to being able to expand it to the 100K participants. So this is one of the examples where we're trying to expand the pipelines.
Great, thank you so much. I've just put a link in the chat as well, because we'll end today's session now. So thank you to everyone for joining. But I've just put a small link in the chat to the scientific conference that's coming up on the 8th of December. There are still lots of spots left for joining us online, so please do register and be able to hear more updates from the kind of the research community, but also from UK Biobank in terms of where we're heading with new data and different projects, but also in terms of enhancements to the platform and resource as well. So thank you to all of our speakers for joining, but also to everyone online. And we look forward to seeing the types of research that you do with the new data.